Yes, 11th class. In the last session, we had discussed that how does the process of the gases of exchange takes place in case of human being between the alveoli, or you can say between the air in the alveoli and blood in the capillaries, as well as the exchange of the gases between the tissues and the blood. Now, in this session, I'm going to tell you that how does this transportation of the respiratory gases takes place. Now, firstly, you should be very clear that what are the what are the respiratory gases. So there are two main gases that are involved in this process of respiration. One is the oxygen, and second is the CO2, as you can see. So the blood that plays a very important role in the transportation of the gases, that is O2 and CO2. This I had already discussed in the last session. So today the main focus is to that how these gases are transported by blood. Now firstly, see this oxygen is transported by RBCs in the blood, and approximately 97% of oxygen is transported by RBC, and remaining 3% of oxygen that is carried in the dissolved form through the plasma. So you can say that oxygen that is transported in two ways by the blood, 97% of the oxygen by the RBCs and remaining 3% of oxygen in the dissolved form through the plasma. Now, as you know that respiratory pigment in human being is hemoglobin. Now see, this hemoglobin combines with oxygen and it results in the formation of oxyhemoglobin. Now you should be clear that under which condition this hemoglobin is going to bind with this oxygen. Now think about that what happens when the gaseous exchange that takes place between the alveoli as well as the blood. Now when you are inhaling, oxygen rich air enters into alveoli. So obviously what will you say? The partial pressure of oxygen that is more in alveoli, right? And partial pressure of the oxygen will be less in blood at that time. It means what will you say? That the PO2, that is partial pressure of the oxygen, that is more in alveoli. That's why the blood will take the oxygen from the alveolar air. So you will say that HB, it is combined with the hemoglobin when it is being exposed to the higher partial pressure of the oxygen. So you must keep this thing in your mind that when the O2 concentration is very high, then hemoglobin will bind with O2 and it will result in formation of oxyhemoglobin. Now this hemoglobin will release the O2 where oxygen concentration is low. Now remember, where is the oxygen concentration low? Obviously, when the blood is moving toward the cell, at that time the PO2 will be less in the cell. That's why the oxygen will be separated from the hemoglobin and it will be delivered to the air. It will be delivered to the tissue where the oxygen will be utilized for the oxidation of food material. Now in this paragraph you can see all the things that are given in the detail. These are the conditions when the hemoglobin is going to bind with the oxygen. Now you can see first one is the high PO2, that is high partial pressure of oxygen, low PCO2, low pressure of CO2, lesser higher hydrogen ion concentration and lower temperature. So you will say that these are the factors that are responsible for the formation of oxyhemoglobin. So these are four factors. One is high PO2, second is low PCO2, third is the lesser hydrogen ion concentration, and fourth one is the lower temperature. Similarly, there are many factors that result in dissociation of the oxyhemoglobin, means when the oxygen will be separated from the hemoglobin. Now, in which part this oxygen is going to be separated from the hemoglobin? Obviously, it will be in the cell. So when the blood is moving toward the cell, the oxygen will be separated from the hemoglobin. It will be delivered to the cell. Now these are the factors that favors the dissociation of the oxyhemoglobin. These factors are just opposite to these factors. For the binding of oxygen with hemoglobin, we need high PO2, but for separation, we need less PO2. Here it was low PCO2, but now it is high PCO2. Third, lesser hydrogen ion concentration for formation and high hydrogen ion concentration as well as high temperature These four factors are the conditions that result in separation of the oxygen from the oxyhemoglobin. Now you can see this curve is known as oxygen dissociation curve. On this side you can see it is the saturation of hemoglobin with oxygen, and this is the PO2 of the oxygen. As you can see that as the partial pressure of the oxygen will increase, as you can see that if the PO2 is high, then hemoglobin will bind with oxygen. So you can see with increase in the PO2 of the oxygen, the binding level of the blood with oxygen is going to be increased. So it is the oxygen dissociation curve. Then moving further, the next respiratory gas is the CO2. Now, how does transportation of CO2 take place? The transportation of the CO2 that takes place in three ways. First one, you can see here, approximately 20 to 25% of CO2 is transported by RBC. Remaining 70% is carried in the form of bicarbonate, and the left part, that is 7% approximately, this will be carried in dissolved state through plasma. Now see how does this formation of the carbonate take place. Now look at this equation. The CO2 is going to combine with water and it result in formation of H2CO3. This H2CO3 is actually the bicarbonic acid, and this equation will take place in the presence of carbonic anhydrase. This is the enzyme that favors the combination of CO2 with water, and it result in formation of bicarbonic acid. Now this H2CO3 will undergo dissociation again in the presence of same enzyme, and it result in formation of bicarbonate ion and hydrogen ion. So this is the major way by which the CO2 is transported in our body.